50,000 troops, 250 aircraft, 65 warships, and 10,000 tanks and vehicles. That's a pretty straightforward message.
It is ambitious and it is demanding. In recent years, Europe's security environment has significantly deteriorated.
NATO has been careful not to mention Moscow as the boogeyman, which the exercise is aimed against, but there are no illusions. NATO jets will be flying a mere 200 kilometers from Russian borders. Troops will be learning to fight in cold conditions against a simulated enemy that is, unsurprisingly, exactly as powerful as Moscow.
The effect of this activity will increase the tension between Norway and Russia. Despite quite clumsy attempts by the representatives of the alliance and its member states to picture such military activity as defensive, it's obvious that this fighting capabilities demonstration has a distinct anti-Russian character.
Tensions now are worse than they've been in a third of a century. Both NATO and Moscow have been going to extremes, staging bigger and bigger war games. Russia's Vostok maneuvers, NATO's Trident war games, record size for both this year, and each blame each other.
Vostok demonstrates Russia's focus on exercising large-scale conflict. It fits into a pattern we've seen over some time. A more assertive Russia significantly increasing its defence budget and its military presence.
Wait. Getting a little carried away there. Russia's military budget has been decreasing, not increasing, year after year. You'd have thought NATO intelligence would have spotted that. Now, compare Moscow's military spending to NATO's, which is almost $1 trillion a year. It literally accounts for half the world's military spending. I mean, there's no competition here.
NATO's military activity at the borders of Russia has reached an unprecedented post-Cold War level. Bloc countries are engaged in offensive drills. The aim of all this is increased capacity to swiftly deploy troops across Europe.
It's a remarkable cycle. NATO builds up its forces. Moscow responds by building up its own, which NATO then calls Russian aggression and uses it to justify stationing more tanks, more troops near Russia. Rinse and repeat. All very impressive as far as military escalations go, but what with all these war games, this propaganda, militant rhetoric, and collapsing arms treaties, one can only wonder, how long can we go on like this? How much more we can escalate before a stupid decision or an accident puts a spark to this $1 trillion powder keg.
Насколько я помню, на гербе Соединенных Штатов изображен орлан. С одной стороны он держит 13 стрел, а с другой стороны оливковую ветвь, как знак миролюбивой политики, с 13 оливками. Вопрос.
And here goes the question.
Ваш орлан уже все оливки склевал, остались одни стрелы.
And what is left? Only the arrows.
And I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you on behalf of President Trump. And hopefully I'll have some answers for you. But I didn't bring any more olives.
Я так и думал.
That's what I thought.
So here's the thing. The Chinese government almost never says anything you wouldn't expect. That's their thing, their gimmick. They're incredibly careful, reserved, at least with their tongues. So when the Chinese president orders his military to prepare for war, serious indeed.
He urged the military to concentrate on advancing readiness for war.
The Chinese are preparing for war, out loud. How, oh how, did we get to this? Well, Trump, for one, Aside from lambasting the Chinese at every opportunity, his tariffs, his sanctions, his trade war, he's also being very heavy-handed. Congress has just approved a second arms deal with Taiwan in 18 months.
The sales of weapons by the United States to Taiwan damages China's sovereignty and security interests.
Beijing sees China and Taiwan as two parts of a whole, two Chinese entities, same culture, ethnicity, same languages, with two separate governments, communist, capitalist. The end goal is to reunite into one state. There are differences, of course, currently preventing that, and about 100 kilometers of sea that separate the two. And Trump, always a fan of sticking it to the Chinese, he's been floating his warships right between the two Chinas.
We have expressed our concerns to the US side. The Taiwan issue concerns China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and is the most important and sensitive issue in China-US relations.
For starters, how about you express your concerns about these important and sensitive issues to someone who cares a little more? Because that ain't Trump.
Are you worried about any negative reactions?
I'm not worried about anything. I don't worry about things.
Hakuna Matata. Must be great never worrying about anything. Unfortunately, others are. There are those in China who believe that America wants Taiwan to declare independence, and the Chinese are preparing for that eventuality, militarily.
We are resolute to defeat any scheme or act of Taiwan independence in any form.
Thing is, the Taiwanese don't really see a point to defending themselves. Taiwan, which recently switched from a conscription to a volunteer army, is having huge trouble recruiting. Even reserve troops are dodging their duty. After all, what's the point? They'd never win.
The government needs to think whether it's necessary to bring conscription back if they think national security matters.
But Taiwan is a minor player in this confrontation. If war does break out, it'll likely be the People's Republic of China slogging it out with the United States rather than Taiwan. And that is a war that Trump really ought to be worried about.
The world is really at a crossroad, facing major threats to world peace and development. Between China and the United States, the tensions are getting more and more acute, and the United States has been pushing China around, humiliating China, and imposing unilateral tariffs on the Chinese exports. China does not want to have a trade war with the United States. China does not want to have armed conflict with the United States. But if the United States really wants to impose these things onto China, I think the Chinese people will be fully mobilized behind the Chinese government and the Chinese military.
High up. But I would prefer that we don't use as retribution canceling $110 billion worth of work, which means 600,000 jobs. I know it sounds easy and it sounds good, and a lot of people have said, oh, let's just not sell them 110 billion, or I guess you take it a step further, let's not sell them 450 billion, which is the largest order in the history of our country. Well, I think it's a good first step. It's a big step. It's a lot of people involved, and I think it's a great first step. Saudi Arabia has been a great ally, but what happened is unacceptable.
Author and historian Gerald Horne believes that the humanitarian crisis in Yemen has been provoked by US actions in the Middle East.
There is an ongoing famine that is gripping Yemen that is having a particularly devastating impact on children and youth and pregnant women. This is a direct result of the Saudi-led intervention in Yemeni internal affairs. Famine is ultimately a political question. That is why, even though, like any humanitarian, I would support the provision of food to the starving and the famished in Yemen, ultimately there has to be a political solution in order for this famine to stop, which is one of the reasons why I would hope that the parties would pay attention to the words of the special envoy of the United Nations Secretary General, who is calling for speedy talks to resolve this very troublesome problem. The problem in Yemen, in no small measure, is made in USA and their North Atlantic allies. Now, supposedly, Washington is opposed to the rise and the surge of al-Qaeda, but for whatever reason, they're supporting the Saudi-backed intervention, which is sharing a trench with al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula. As ever, U.S. foreign policy in Yemen is incoherent, just as it's incoherent in Syria, where it's pursuing a similar harebrained policy.
بشمالك بذنوبك بسهلك